What can you learn from someone that has more than 500 episodes that's also incredibly mindful? That is what you're going to find out today. Stay tuned. Agi, thanks for coming on. First off, we'll get into like what you do, but you started in dentistry and are now in podcasting. I don't see many connections between the two of those, except for the fact that the words have to make it past the teeth to get out there. Where'd the pivot come from? How's the pivot?
Yeah. Now that you say it, I don't see the connection either. I suppose it is how life guides one in a journey. So it doesn't necessarily mean that because I've walked a path in a certain way, I will need to carry on in a similar direction. So the pivot came in my early 40s, when I entered that period of, let's call it reinvention, in the midlife, when I realized that dentistry, which I had been doing for, about 20 years up to then, was not something that I wanted to do for another 20 years. I had lost my passion, my motivation. And that led me, along with, the midlife changes that I referred to earlier, it led me to personal development as a way to understand myself, understand why am I, like this? Why am I not happy with my job, etc. So one thing led to another. Personal development led me to, events, some beliefs that got exposed and changed. Then public speaking, which was, my biggest fear up to then. And eventually, naturally, the podcasting came as something that I thought, oh, this is so interesting. It reminds me of radio. So, I started in 2018 completely as a hobby, just as, out of fun, to explore this thing that fascinated me.
It's a wild swing. And as someone that is experiencing some of those midlife, like, what the hell am I doing here questions? I get it. I came from, I always joke, my career path looks like someone was drunk but I went from automotive to agriculture to trucking to podcasting. So I get hey, what's the wild left turn here? That being said, you have your podcast, but you work with a lot of podcasters. What is it you do to help people?
I don't work with many podcasters anymore, Keith. I have worked in the past and done some work, mentoring, etc. Mainly, I coach and mentor people on their own life journey and transitions, especially in midlife. I think the podcasting part comes for me as a, let's say, integral part of my identity, first of all, of who I am. After all these years, I have not missed a single week of publishing. And, also much of my current knowledge and experience and ability to communicate and so on come as a direct result of me podcasting for all these years, both mainly as a host, but also, coming to great podcasts like yours over the years.
You've talked with a fair number of people over the years, I think, especially since 2018. When I start doing that math, that is 8 years. Which it's funny. I saw you look up a little bit. You're like, oh yeah, that is 8 years.
Time flies, doesn't it?
My
blink
goodness.
of an eye and it's gone.
Especially, when you mentioned the midlife stuff, that's when you suddenly realize that it seems like someone wound the clock a little hard. And boy, as time sped up as we go through with this. You talk, one of the things that you talked about, the article kind of that I saw was, and what drew me to saying, look, let's have this conversation was I saw a post you had on LinkedIn about your 3-filter workflow for when you're getting the cold pitches for episodes. And one of my favorite stories I love to tell is I co-host a show with Chrissy Myers called The Business Fix. We don't have guests on, and we are getting pitched guests at like, hey, I would love to be a guest on your show. And I'm to the point now where I have fun with it because I send back, who's been your favorite guest so far? But that 3-filter workflow, could you kind of talk a little bit about that? Because it's a big deal in making sure that you're having the right guests on.
Definitely, and the example that you gave is very, a very obvious example of how little effort is being put nowadays anyway into pitches to podcast hosts. And anyone that hosts a podcast probably has experienced that already. Some, emails that, the thing is, Keith, and I will talk about the 3 filters. The thing is that I remember just up to perhaps a couple of years ago, there were some more personal and thoughtful pitches. I remember receiving from some potential guests a video that said, "Hello, Agi, I listened to your podcast. I left you a review. This is what I talk about, which I think resonates." And, that kind of personal approach, now that AI is so much more, widespread, it has been replaced with impersonal pitches that, however, they do sound like, apart from the example that you gave earlier, I do receive pitches that I find that it's AIs that read the RSS of my podcast, and they can present a very elaborate pitch like someone is my best listener because they have checked all the show notes of the previous episodes. So, when you receive these kinds of emails several times a week, or, for some people there are multiple a day, it's difficult. On the one hand, it is a huge amount of time to go through all these and figure out which are for real and which are relevant and so on. On the other hand, me personally, I wouldn't like to miss something that was really good, a gem among all that. So I found over the years that the best for me, and I've seen it work for others as well, the best filter, because indeed there is a 3-filter process that I described in that speech you talk about. By the way, it is a free teaching, so anyone can access it. So the first filter is send all those people that either email me or DM me and say, "Oh, I want to be a guest on your podcast," or whatever. Send them to PodMatch. PodMatch is a platform that handles, the connection, shall we say, between guests and hosts. In my experience, it's the best there is out there because there are other, similar platforms, but I've been using it for years. I'm so happy with it. The big advantage that this filter gives you is that anyone who is mass pitching or are not serious about coming to your show, and what I mean by that is that, many guests set a target and say, "I want to go to 10 podcasts this month." It doesn't really matter if they are relevant or not. Let me go to 10 podcasts. And, all these people they don't really make any effort to join PodMatch and create a profile and message me there. But that's basically my first filter. It's a very clear instruction that I handle all my guest applications through PodMatch. If you want to be considered, send me a message. Here's my profile. That is the first filter.
I love that start to it too. And what's funny about it is The way that I saw your post is we weren't connected on LinkedIn. I actually saw your post on LinkedIn. We weren't connected on LinkedIn. I saw that Alex, the founder of PodMatch, had commented on your post. That was what was flagged in my feed. So I went over and read it, and I was like, yes. So that's how it made sense. And I truly, it was an interesting piece. What is the second piece to that then?
The second piece is once someone messaged me on PodMatch, I would like to have a fairly quick way of, I like to call it like a triage. So it's easy for me to determine whether that pitch or guest is good and relevant to me, because someone might still go into PodMatch or already be on PodMatch and email me about the example. I remember it still. It was a real estate broker that wanted to talk about how to flip houses for a profit. But I have a personal development podcast, so it's not really relevant. So I want a quick way to assess those, or triage, that's the word I used earlier. So some of them, with PodMatch, everyone has to make a profile page, which is quite standardized. The bio, some questions or topics that the guest talks, etc. So from that, at a glance, or perhaps not at a glance, I'm exaggerating a bit, but in a few minutes, it takes me just to decide whether that guest is good, which I call it a yes. And in that case, via the platform, I can coordinate the scheduling and so on. One is, that is one category of pitches. The other is a no, like the example I just gave a minute ago. And there is a third category, which is right in between. It's not a clear yes, it's not a clear no. And these people, I use the third filter, but I will take a pause here in case you want to expand on anything more.
No, I'd love to talk about that, because then the next thing that I want to get into after that is like how you feel how important the right guests are. So yeah, let's hear the third filter if we could real quick, and then we'll go into that.
The third filter very quickly is if I'm unsure about a person, a guest, I ask them to listen to a couple of episodes of my podcast and get back to me. I say, listen and tell me what resonated. That really makes it easier to understand, because someone serious will listen and say, Keith, I came back and, sorry. They will say something that is relevant to my podcast. So, yeah, I will keep it short and succinct.
That makes sense. And I feel the same way about it, because there's in many cases where I am getting pitched stuff and I'm like, we're a podcast for podcasters. Yes. In fact, we just had to tell someone we went ahead and we recorded an episode, and we're probably not going to publish it because it stayed out of there was a lot of self-pitching. There was a lot of other items in there where I'm like, no. This is for the people. This is not for, we do our podcast for promotion, but we do it through promotion, through learning, not just raw, hey, I'm going to say the thing 20 times in your face and have it, hope it sticks. When, like for your show, like in personal development, there's so many ways that can go sideways, and there's so many, people can consider that a broad topic, but I know you've got yours pointed in a certain direction. We talked about kind of the midlife area of like, hey, look, here's what I'm doing. Here's what I'm trying to go. Like there's a pivot involved with it, things of that nature. To you, how important is it? And like, what's your experience when it does go sideways with a guest? And what's the difference when it's good with a guest? How does that feel? And once the tail end that I want to hear on that is, how does your audience feel? Do you see that in numbers? Is your podcast not getting the results you hoped for? Are you feeling stuck and unsure how to grow your audience or make a real impact? We get it.
podcasting can be a challenge, but with the right strategies, it can be an incredibly powerful tool. That's why we're offering our free no-pitch podcast consultation. We'll spend 30 minutes with you identifying areas for improvement on anything from optimizing your audio or video quality to developing a content strategy that resonates with your customers. If you're ready to unleash your podcast's full potential, visit the link in our show notes to schedule your free consultation. Space is limited, so sign up today so we can help you create a podcast that truly shines.
Josh, I had also not published interviews that I've done because of the exact same reason that you said, because the guest was all about telling that one of my clients did this and with another person I worked with did that. And that was, it was really not the kind of output and outcome I want to have from the conversation that is always, for me personally, it is to inspire the listener to take some action to improve their lives. So by listening, the achievements of someone, people don't care about that. They care about themselves, what's in it for them.
Yes.
So, the importance of a guest who understands that is it is one of the things I see it more with inexperienced podcast guests, because the more experienced ones, the ones I have seen that they have been to many podcasts, they realize that they are not there to pitch what they do or sell or say. They are there to serve the audience of the podcast, and the guests who don't understand that make for a conversation that is not fulfilling the purpose that I would like it, to fulfill. And you asked, if it goes sideways. Now, after all these years of podcasting and the experience that I have, I can really drag them back to the conversation with my, as a host.
Sure.
I will take the leadership of the conversation. I'll say, okay, let's not talk about this anymore. I want to hear more about this or whatever it is that, and this came, that's how I'm handling it now. But was I handling it like that 5 years ago? Absolutely not. I will stand and listen, very carefully because I felt like it would be rude to interrupt them. But not anymore. I guide the conversation. That's the role, one of my roles as a host, if not the main role, to guide the conversation, the interview, towards the outcome that I want for my audience.
Right. From the aspect of your business and how you do things, when you have guests on, is that to educate you? Is that to educate your audience? Is that for when you have a guest on, what is your typical goal with them? To me, it's always interesting to hear because people have different motivations for it.
For sure. Look, learning firsthand, it is certainly, that was the reason when I first started doing interviews, I realized how much direct learning opportunity there was, because all these people, especially at that time, were experts in an area that I didn't know much about and I would like to learn more about. So I had the opportunity to directly ask them the things that I wanted to learn. Over time, of course, this became more, not just what Agi wants to learn, but what would the listener of Agi would like to learn via the conversation. So the objective for me, and I mentioned it earlier, is always for my podcast when I do an interview to inspire my listener to take some kind of action, not just to listen to it and say, oh, that was a nice podcast I heard, and not do anything with it. Because we don't grow that way.
No.
We can consume all the information there is, but, to know and not to do is not to know.
Oh, to know and not to do is not to know. I like that. I may have to use that one. That being said, and I'm going to ask this question two different ways. I have a tendency to do that quite a bit there. The first way I want to kind of ask the question is what is an insight that you got from a guest where just when they said it, you're like, oh my gosh, this is, I mean, it was pivotal for you. Has there been a big insight where you're like, oh, that was it?
Josh, I was thinking that you might ask me something like this. It is every time, my podcast now has 500. Today we're 585 episodes, and
that's amazing.
As you can imagine, it's difficult to isolate. I mean, I can, or I could isolate episodes, but I always find it difficult to say, okay, this was the insight without some kind of context that would go. So my insight about what? So
it's a tough one. It's a broad one.
Yes.
And I guess what I'll stem off of that, though, is like from a podcasting standpoint. I mean, I always make the analogy that everyone's like, I can talk, so I'm going to be a great podcaster, right? And it's the analogy I always like to make. It's the same way that I drove to my studio, therefore I'm a race car driver. No. Yes. What has been the thing that you've learned about podcasting that has really, like, what's the one thing that's been like a big lesson to you about podcasting as a whole?
I will tell you two, actually, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, please do.
The first one is exactly what you just said about, the analogy that because I can talk, I can be a podcaster. And I have found that it is actually about being able to listen rather than being able to talk. Especially, on a podcast like this, where there is a conversation. It's not, if I listen attentively and carefully, and then I will know what to say. So it's not about that. So that is, one big thing that certainly I have improved as a communicator generally by doing the podcast. The other one, which is probably, when I consider all these years and the episodes and the lessons, is that growth, success, in podcasting, in whatever, in many things, is a long game. And I have realized the power of consistency, the power of patience, and the power of keeping the vision of where you want to go alive in your head, even if the results that you are, expecting are not showing yet. That is, the most in the most summarized way I can explain this. When I think of that, you probably have you heard the story of the Chinese bamboo tree?
No.
It is a kind of a bamboo tree that takes the years of, once you plant it, it takes years of growing its roots before it even breaks through the ground. So you need to tender to it and water it and fertilize it, and for years nothing shows. It doesn't even break through the ground. And when it actually does break after years through the ground, in a few weeks it has gone to some tremendous height of several feet, which brings the question: did it grow in a few weeks or in 4 years?
Sure.
So I find this a great analogy with our efforts in life, in business, in success, in personal development, and how many times we don't see the results right away, but that is because we need to grow roots, deeper and deeper roots, whatever these roots are, the systems or our emotional capabilities or whatever.
Brilliant answer. I love that. It comes back to something. The past couple of guests that I've had on, one of which was, one of the first ones to really hammer on this was Dave Jackson. Dave's local to me, so I actually had him sitting in fact, he sat in this chair right here. So loved having him in. He talked about knowing your why, like why you're starting your podcast, because as you said, it's a long game. The question that I haven't asked anyone yet that just kind of struck me, you've been doing this for, as you said, 500 plus episodes. Has your why changed?
Yes, it has. Yes, it has. When I started, my why was because I'm curious about what is podcasting and what it can do for me. After a little while, I still remember, and I will just share that as a story, Josh. When I first recorded my first ever episode, and that was, my first podcast, which I had a co-host, so we didn't have guests, but it was our very, very first recording. When he came to my home, we did a home studio. It was very interesting. And we recorded a few episodes, and after he left, I had a buzz that, I was elated. I had a buzz that lasted for many hours, like I was, on top of the world. And then I realized, right, there is something here to be, explored further. And after, it was probably a year or just over a year that I was doing it, I started my second podcast, the one I have now, Personal Development Mastery. And then just when I started it, COVID happened. So I was at home along with, most people were stuck at home. So I started doing 2 episodes every week. And that's when I realized that this was not a hobby anymore, because it was taking a lot of my time. I was doing everything myself. There was no ChatGPT in 2020. So, there was a lot of time spent on it. And then I realized, okay, this is not a hobby anymore. It has become a passion. So the why transformed from a hobby to a real passion of mine. And of course, when years kept going and I kept putting in the time and the number of episodes went to several hundreds, I realized that it had gone past the passion stage again. And what it has become, and that is my why now for the last few years, it is a mission. It is certainly a part of my purpose, of what I bring, to this world with what I'm doing, sharing my gift, if you want to call it like that, my unique abilities. And podcast is a part of my purpose. So definitely has. Thank you for this question, and I'm glad that I am the first one you asked it. So.
No, it's interesting, especially because the depth that you've had with this, to me, it's one of those things that struck me is there's a lot of people that have been in this for a year, a couple of years, things of that nature. I mean, we've edited them. We've been editing podcasts for 7-8 years now. I didn't even start mine until about 2 years ago. So same idea with that. It's that you've been on this long journey with that. With that, I want to go to the mission piece of it. It's a beautiful segue that you gave me into this, because you've stated that your mission is to ignite growth. How do you see that moving forward with the podcast? How are you going to help ignite growth for people with the podcast as we move forward?
Thank you. Thank you for the phrase "ignite growth." It is a nice take on it. How I say it is inspire positive change, but ignite growth sounds very, a very nice other way of saying it. The podcast has the ability to reach different people, different parts of the world at different times. So the episodes from 2020 are still there. Someone might find this. I was checking the other day, I get an email from a service that I have that shows me if the podcast is on charts, the Apple Podcast charts. And I saw it was in Nigeria. And I thought, wow, there are people in Africa, in Nigeria that are listening to, or Zimbabwe, that are listening to the podcast. Not many, but, it was a realization that our ability to reach people as podcasters is so broad that you never know when and who and how you might make a difference to someone's life, hopefully, if they take action on what they listened to. So, to answer your question about the future, I can only see this increasing even more. Many podcasts, and now I will digress for a moment because it just came up to me. There are many podcasts, let's say a big percentage of podcasts out there that are not that good, to be honest.
Correct.
I'm saying it very politely, but
no, you can go ahead and say, we will say that part out loud. There's a lot of podcasts out there. I follow an Instagram channel that is all about, it is literally saying podcasting equipment should be more expensive. And I am quoted as saying, podcasting has the benefit of having a very low barrier to entry. It also has the curse of having a very low barrier to entry. So yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's so true. That's so true. But very, exactly with what you're saying. I think in the future there will be better filtering out. I don't know exactly how. It won't be by us. It will be by the big players, Apple, Spotify, or whoever else. There will be better filters of presenting the good podcasts more than, a podcast that is from someone irrelevant or from someone who just has an audience because they're an influencer and they chuck a podcast on top of that, which is... I'm not going to drop any names. I'm just saying.
There's a few that I have talked about that, they have an audience and they have brought that audience to podcasting. That doesn't mean that they're good podcasters. There's a number of well-ranked podcasts that have the money behind them. And they've got the fame behind them already. So we have seen that, and we have talked about that kind of, I have talked about that at length to a certain extent, just because of the fact it's one of those interesting things to see sometimes. On the flip side of that, what's interesting too is when you look at social media content, the ones that are getting viewed, it's not necessarily that it's the best content, but bad content because there's such a glut of content. Some of the worst ones aren't getting the traction that maybe some of the other ones should. It's a balancing act, and it's always interesting to see. That all being said, I mean, it was a while ago when you started podcasting. The question that I always like to ask,
to keep reminding me of that.
Yeah. Sorry. It was recently. It was recently when you started podcasting. I get it. Yeah.
We were talking about earlier on before our call about how time flies quickly.
Yes. Very, very rapidly. I was 20 a few weeks ago.
Feels like that, doesn't it? Sometimes.
Correct. There's days where it feels like that, and there's also days where it feels like it was 200 years ago. But nonetheless, one of the big questions that I like to ask kind of to wrap things up is we talk with people that are currently podcasting, starting podcasting, but a lot, in some cases, are thinking about podcasting. You cannot say just press record because that is the lamest answer on the planet. And you know which question I'm going to ask then is what is the piece of advice that you're going to give to someone that's thinking about podcasting or just starting podcasting?
To focus on the why. That's the answer that comes more the first of all things. The why do you want to have a podcast, and be very specific and write it down. That would be my recommendation. And try to fill a page out of, the reasons why you want to make a podcast. And then you will have the opportunity to clarify your thoughts about it, because when you're at the beginning, you know what, it's easy to start for the wrong reasons. It's very easy. And podcasting is not, the analogy I like is it's like a marathon. It's not like a sprint. So if you're expecting to start a podcast and in a couple of months to be a superstar, I hate to break it to you, but it's not that possible. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's not very likely that will happen. Perhaps you can start a TikTok or something else if you want, quicker results. So focusing on the reason why you want to be in podcasting and is something that will help you clarify things and help you see ahead. There are so many things to this question you asked me. We could do a separate episode about it, but I think that is the fundamental, answer that I would give to someone starting.
I absolutely love that. Agi, thank you for the time today. Where can people find you if they want your podcast, they want to connect with you? Where can people find you?
The best place is my podcast, Personal Development Mastery. The website is personaldevelopmentmasterypodcast.com. It's a long thing, but it works. I would be very happy to have someone, Josh, reach out to me as a result of this conversation. I would be happy. Just tell me that you listen to me here, and I would love to connect and help if I can.
Absolutely love that. Thank you. I appreciate the time today. Greatly appreciated. For everyone else, I took notes. I took a lot of notes. I need a minute to think about those, and I will be right back. Oh, do I have notes? Agi's, first off, what a great guy, what a great personality and everything like that with it. There's a couple of things that I have here on my computer screen right in front of me. The one that we talk about all the time, it's long game. Don't podcast and think you're going to have 3 million listens next week. You're not. Unless you've got the budget to put behind that, or you're already brilliantly famous. It's just not going to happen. Podcasting is a long game, like so many other things in life. But that's why you should start building it yesterday or today. If you haven't started building it yet, today is the day that you should start building it, because it is that long game. Long games are all about showing up consistently. If you lose that consistency, guess what? You're just not going to get that growth. I'm going to equate it to going to the gym. You're not going to get muscles by showing up to the gym like it's 7 days, then you skip 7 days, then you show up 2 days, then you wait 5 days, and then you show up 1 day, and then you go all the next 7 days. No, that's not how it works. It's coming up with a consistent schedule over time, which takes patience. That's another point that Agi talked about there. It's having the patience to know that this is the long game and tethering it to the why. Now, I was very specific in asking him about, has his why changed? And he says it has. And I loved his answers on that, because he gave me the path of why his why has changed a little bit. But once again, what was interesting is it was more of an evolution of his why instead of a hard change. There wasn't a point where he said there's a pivot in the why. He said it's developed. To me, he's mentioned the why. So many people have mentioned knowing why you're doing this. If you're like, I want sales next week as your why, podcasting is not going to be the way to do this. If you want to build a long-lasting, long-term expertise of, by, and for your business, podcasting is an absolutely amazing way to do it. he gave the example of that bamboo tree. And that's something that I haven't had the chance to go look it up yet, but I'm going to look that up because to me, what a great story. What a great analogy. It spends a ton of time growing under the ground before it finally sprouts up and everyone sees it. It's like, oh, hey, look at what just sprouted up. No. This has been in the works for a long time. This is coming. This is growing. There's a growth that you don't see when it suddenly sprouts up. Most podcasts that we see, that we work with, they do the same thing. They stay real low and then they start to pick up and you see this building and then there's this exponential growth for a while. That's the same as that bamboo tree. The thing that I like too is he talked about that buzz that you get from podcasting. We recorded this fairly early in the day. A conversation like this truly gets me smiling for the entire day. I've met someone new. I've learned from someone new. I've gotten some really cool information from them. How can that not set you up for a great day? It's one of the reasons I typically like to record in the morning because, once again, this is a good day. He said with his why, it went from just we're doing this to a passion. It went from a hobby to part of the business. Then it turned into a passion. Then it turned into a mission. That mission piece, that to me is so valuable because like passion and mission, I feel like they're adjacent terms, but mission is like, this is something I am trying to accomplish. I am working on something hard because I'm trying to accomplish it. The fact that he has that as his mission, to me, that's so cool. I mean, it truly is. He has learned some hard lessons. He has spent some time making sure that he has learned the things about what he's gone through. And he is taking those lessons, distilling them down and passing them on to other people. Something that I heard years ago is a smart person learns from their mistakes. A wise person learns from the mistakes of others. He is helping to distill some of that information, some of those mistakes that he's made and then he's learned from others. And he's distilling that for other people. To me, that's an awesome mission to be a part of. Making lives better. How can you go wrong with that? Truly. The last thing that I really want to talk about, and this is your call to action for the day. Knowledge without action is not knowledge. When he said that, I can't believe I've never heard that before, but 100% true. Knowledge without action is not knowledge. What good is stored knowledge unless you're putting it into action? With that being said, take some of the things that you've learned from Agi, take some of the things that you've learned from other people that we've had on the show. We've had some great podcasters on the show. We've had some great podcast production company and like voice people on the show. Take those things, learn from them. That's why we do the show. I want to make sure that you are learning from this, that you are able to pick these things up and carry them on. Once again, the smart person and the wise person, they learn two different ways. And that is why we bring people on the show. If there's someone that you'd like to see, do me a favor, hit us in the DMs, comments, leave us a review. I would love for you to leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or just wherever you're listening to right now. Would mean the world to me. Also, as I said, follow. We've got a lot of followers, but it's a low percentage of people that are following as compared to the ones that actually listen on a weekly basis. And it's interesting. I don't know how you guys are finding the podcast, and I'm so glad you are, but hit the follow button. I would love to talk with you and learn with you every single week. Do me a favor. Take care of yourself if you can. Take care of someone else too. I will see you very, very soon.
Creating engaging content can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. That's why I'm excited to share our Stomping Podcasting newsletter. You'll get actionable insights and expert tips straight to your inbox. These are to help you maximize your video marketing and podcasting return on investment. Head over to the show notes and click the link to subscribe to our free newsletter. Don't miss out on this opportunity to become a video marketing and podcasting pro.